Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for coming out this evening. A lot has happened to me and my department in the last 6 months, and I'm going to try to talk about it as much as I can. The one thing I have to say before I get too deep into this is far from an end of the story. The prosecution is going on, so I'm not allowed to talk a lot about the details that may affect the prosecution. So there's a lot of details I won't be able to speak about tonight, but I can kind of talk in general what happened, what effect it had on our city of Boston and in my community. You heard about Watertown. Watertown is a small, densely populated community that touches Cambridge and Boston. We're only 4.1 square miles with over 30,000 people that live there. So it's a lot of two-family homes, a tight-knit group of people. And we don't usually have a lot of issues. We're a 65-man police department. Before the recession, we were 75, so we lost 10 positions over 7 or 8 years. And I understand your state has done much better through the recession than most. And I'm sure the staffing on a lot of police departments haven't been as affected as us in the Northeast, but that's what happened to my department. So we're 65 men and women. And when Boston Marathon happened, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a big day in Boston. It's a state holiday. We call it Patriots Day. It's a Monday. The Red Sox play their baseball game every year on that date, and they play early. You know, it's kind of not normal, but they play at 11 o'clock in the morning. So everybody at Fenway Park can come down to Kenmore Square and route the runners through Kenmore Square, which is about a mile from the finish line. So it's a big deal. It's my favorite weekend of the year. I've run the Boston Marathon 3 times myself. So anybody that's from the greater Boston area, you usually know somebody that's running in the race. We have the elite runners, but then we have a lot of numbers that are saved for charities to raise money for Children's Hospital, a lot of good charities in the Boston and New England area. So people tend to gather at the finish line after the elite runners have finished, and it's more of a community event at that point. And that's exactly what happened on the 15th of April. The elite runners had already finished. It was 3.5, almost 4 hours into the race, so it was just the regular people, if you will, waiting for their loved ones to come and finish the race. And that's when the first bomb went off and the next bomb went off. And it literally turned our city upside down. No one could believe it happened. You know, you prepare for it. The Boston Police Department is an excellent police department. Had a lot of people out. They had swept the race route time and time again. As I said, the marathon is such a big deal. The whole 26 miles is lined with people. It goes through a number of colleges: Wellesley College, Boston College, kind of touches Boston University. So it's a lot of spectators as well. So we know it's a big event and it can be a target, but we never, the Boston guys will tell you that once the elite runners finished the race, it was kind of a sigh of relief. Okay, we got through another one. Everything's going to be okay, and it wasn't. So as that happened, and some of the things that 4 people got killed, over 250 people were seriously injured and taken to the hospital. Every single person that made it to the hospital lived. And it's a number of reasons, because you have to plan for events like this. The ambulances were there because they knew the runners were going to be coming across. They were prepared for that. Some of the best doctors and nurses were right there. Boston has 4 trauma hospitals, and they have a plan that they never overwhelm one hospital. So as soon as the victims started to go to the different hospitals, they spaced it out so they got the care they needed. I think it was 75 city ambulances we used, 43 private ambulances. At the very end, they ran out of ambulances, and the Boston police and the state police were actually using patrol wagons to transport people to the hospital. Any way to get those people to the hospital and get them the help they needed. And that was a real great effort. You've heard about the term Boston Strong, and I'll talk about that. I don't think it would be any different if tragedy struck here in Little Rock, that we wouldn't be talking about Little Rock strong, because a community has to come together. It just has to come together in support when something happens, when tragedy strikes, and we've seen it all over the country. I say, the terrorists came to Boston and then to Watertown, and they tried to put fear in our city. They tried to ruin our city, and they failed miserably at the end. Failed miserably. We did lose 4 people. We have a lot of people injured, but Boston is a stronger place now. With law enforcement's a stronger place. This country's a stronger place. We always come together. It's the United States. People in this country that are just work together in tragedy. We see tragedies across other parts of the world, and I just don't think people come together as well as they did. One of the things the lessons learned, that we talk about a lot of different things. I'll just talk about Boston before we get into Watertown. The mayor and governor immediately started what they called the One Fund as soon as this happened. In New York, when 9/11 happened, everybody wanted to help, and there was about 25 or 30 charities that stood up right away. But they never came together. No one wanted to kind of give up and give it to somebody else, so there was always a struggle. When Newtown happened recently, kind of the same thing happened. 3 or 4 things happened. So in Boston, they quickly established the One Fund, so everybody was directed. If you wanted to donate any money, whether it was $1 or some of the big deep pocket business people stepped it up right away, and we had a number of people donated $1 million, 2 or 3 entrepreneurs, and everybody got behind that One Fund right away, and it helped the city. We needed a lot of help as the days went on. So Monday we have the bombing. Tuesday the city's trying to recover. In my police department, all we're doing is trying to support Boston. Watertown is part of what we call a law enforcement council, where regionalization partnership, 50 cities and towns, we share resources. It makes no sense for Watertown, a 65-man department, to have a SWAT team. But it makes all the sense for me to join 50 communities and come up with a 50-man SWAT team, and that's what we have. We have a 150 rapid response team. We have a 60-unit motorcycle unit. So all those units that train all the time. We go into Boston all the time to support them in different events. So we were naturally able to go in and help Boston Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as things played on. And I was proud as a chief to be able to do that. My community was proud that we were helping, because everybody wanted to help. By Thursday, President Obama came into town, and they had a service to try to heal the city. And we needed the President of the United States to come in. We were a hurting city that just needed to be told everything's going to be okay. And I'm sure President Clinton did that many, many times during his terms of office, where he needed to go to a part of this country that needed to have the President of the United States and have his presence there. So that happened Thursday. And then Thursday afternoon, the FBI, Boston State Police put out the pictures of the 2 suspects. I'll never, ever use their names. They don't deserve to be recognized. I think the media does a terrible job of glorifying these people and giving their names and telling their history, and it's kind of what they want. So whenever I've spoken, I've never used their names, and I won't tonight. I'll go as far as to call them the 2 brothers, or White Hat and Black Hat. That's what we call them on Thursday night. They had the pictures we gave out. We're looking for White Hat and Black Hat. And then Thursday night it plays out. The city's on edge. We know who we're looking for. Everybody's trying to help. And then at 10:30 p.m. over in Cambridge, we have the execution of Sean Collier on the MIT campus. And Sean was executed. He was sitting in his cruiser, never knew they were even sneaking up behind him, and they shot him in the back of the head. Which put our city on more edge. But there was no connection between the execution and the Boston bombing. We had no idea that was the case. And then things developed. Back to Watertown, all we're doing is trying to support Boston. I'm sending my 10 or 12 guys in that law enforcement council into Boston every day. They're working 12 to 14-hour shifts. And we roll out for our midnight shift on April 18th into 19th. My officer in charge tells everybody, there's been an officer shot and killed over in Cambridge. Please be careful as you go out tonight. When we had 4 officers on the street that night, Watertown, like I said, borders Cambridge, borders Boston. From Watertown Square to Harvard Square is probably about 3 miles. From Watertown Square to downtown Boston is about 5 or 6 miles. So we're right on top of the city, but we don't really know or expect anything, big to happen. One of my officers had to transport a Watertown resident over to Cambridge that was a witness to Sean Collier's murder. So now we were down to 3 officers out in the street. And then everything came to Watertown. And, we can train. Training is a big deal in every police department, in every law enforcement, and we try to do it in Watertown. One of the things that we do every day, as I said earlier, I've been a police chief for 12 years. And we always try to train, and we try to make our goal every day when we meet with staff meetings to say we want to be the best police department in Massachusetts. And so my thought always was, if you're not getting better, you're moving backwards. So we always try to challenge everybody. In every one of our roll calls, we had what we call every day is training day. We try to teach the officers something new every single day to keep that training going. So I'm not saying we were by far anywhere close to the best trained police department, but we try to keep our officers squared away and ready to kind of take on what might be in front of them. And I've said, when you're the chief or you're a head of an organization, it's not always easy to be the tough person that makes the tough decisions to force people to do what you need to do. I'd be much more popular in my police department if I kind of let the guys do, or the men and women do whatever they want. But we were kind of a rigid department. We've thanked our firearms instructors over and over again after this, because they were kinds of pains in the ass when they were on the range. Made us do it, made us do it, made us do it, but it certainly paid off on that time. So, for leaders in the audience tonight, that when you go back to your jobs, if you're that boss and you got to do what's right for your company or your business, and it's not always popular. And that's what we try to do within our department. And it certainly paid off that evening. My office's first time in America that law enforcement is up against bullets and bombs. We don't train for that. We just don't. We're just not prepared for that. But it doesn't mean you give up or you say, get a timeout or anything else like that. You got to deal with what's in front of you. And I've traveled around and I've spoken a number of times. And I will, as I've said to my officers, I'll go anywhere to talk about you guys. What my officers did on the back streets of Watertown under horrific conditions and be able to come out and be alive and to protect our community and protect the Boston community and protect this country was just remarkable. What they did outside the box and what they did. And again, I can't talk a lot about exactly what they did, but I think I can give a couple of examples. One of my sergeants, when he was taking his gunfire, he almost literally couldn't get out of the car. And he had to, for him to be able to take cover, he decided to put the car in drive and let it roll down the street so he could get behind some cover. And the car rolled down the street and smashed into a fence, and a couple of other things happened to it. And when I got there, he said to me a few minutes after the shooting was over, he said, "Chief, I violated policy." I said, "John, what are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, I rolled the cruiser down the street and it smashed. There's a lot of damage. I know that's against policy." And I said, "John, are you kidding me?" And there was a few adjectives in between. And he said, "Chief, you're not mad at me?" I go, "John, are you friggin' kidding me? You're alive. You're friggin' alive." And we hugged in the middle of that street that night. And we didn't teach. I said, "John, they don't teach you that at the academy. But they will now." Later on in that gunfight, John ran out of bullets, but he didn't give up. He was pretending his gun was still shooting. I said, "John, where the frig did you come up with that?" And he says, "I just didn't want to give up." And I said, "John, they don't teach you that at the academy either, but they will now." So it's just some remarkable stories. There's a lot of stories to be told, not only in Watertown, in Boston, those first responders. Every time I go somewhere in Boston, I meet another victim, and I just hear another story of how people just stood up and did that. You saw the pictures, and I stress it. I'm just so proud of Boston. I'm a Boston guy. I grew up in Watertown. With the police station I'm in, I can look out my window in my office and see the house I grew up in, so I just never left. But I'm proud of that. But it doesn't mean it wouldn't happen here. It wouldn't happen in any part of this country. I think we're just a remarkable people of America that stand up and do the right things when they're challenged. We rarely fail when we're really challenged. So as time went on, we had one person go to the hospital. We had an officer, Officer Donahue, who was shot, seriously wounded. My officers had to go give him aid, and there's no really any good reason Officer Donahue's alive. He literally bled out on the back street of Watertown. Our officers got him to the hospital. One of my officers actually drove the ambulance because no one else knew how to get to the hospital while the EMTs worked on him. And when they were doing CPR on him all the way to the hospital. But the doctors told us afterwards, he said, well, when there's no blood in the body, doing CPR, I understand why you guys were doing it, but it didn't do any good. He really should have some serious brain damage, but he doesn't. So we got a lot of breaks that day, that night. Officer Donahue was on his way to recovery. He just had a new baby just before he went on the shift. He was probably about 2 months old. And his family is getting stronger every day. And there's a lot of things that happened over time. But so as the day developed, what I went through and what my department went through was just unheard of. And we were looking for the second suspect, and we ended up locking down the city of Boston. And how that works is there's no great plan. When he got away down the street, we thought we were going to catch him in 5 minutes. We thought we were going to catch him in 10 minutes. So it's not like we went into all of a sudden a 20-hour manhunt or anything like that. We were going minute by minute, and then we get to be at 4:30 in the morning, and it's like, okay, we still don't have him. I've sent out a reverse 911 to the Watertown community to shelter in place, but now we have to make it the bigger decision. And through, in the command post and with the governor and the mayor and my town manager on the phone, we make the decision to close the transit, close the city of Boston. And now we look back on it and say, wow, that was a lot, but it just made sense. It seemed like that was always the right things to do. We needed to give time for law enforcement to come in and do the job that we needed to do. Our city was on edge, and we needed to find that second person to put this to bed. And it took us a long time. We did the methodical searches, and it went on, and it turned out to be just a Watertown resident that went out in his backyard when we lifted the lockdown at 6 p.m. And I talked to him afterwards, Dave, what happened? And he says, Chief, I just watched you on TV. You told me to stay in the house. At 6 o'clock, you told me I could go out. I went out and had a cigarette, blah, 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 blah. And that's what happened. But a lot, we're thrown into it. Watertown, 65-man department like I talked about. And, we probably had, a couple thousand officers in Watertown that day, with the armored vehicles and everything like that, and trying to manage a scene like that. You don't get trained for that at the academy either. You just get thrown into it. And we practiced unified command. I've been taught it, I understood it, but applying it is hard because everybody's always used to having one person that makes that final decision. And now we're at a table where everybody's an equal say. There's the FBI, there's the National Guard, State Police, Boston Police, Cambridge Police. And we're going around that room and everybody's talking about all the resources they're going to bring in and everything else like that as the manhunt continues. And this one's going to bring hundreds of these, helicopters or whatever it is. And I'm thinking like, geez, don't pick on me and ask me what I got, because I get like 2 bikes in the basement and that's about all I got left. But we all worked together and we made it happen, and we won at the end. That day, in Watertown, we won. Officer Donahue recovered. If Officer Donahue doesn't make it, it's really, I probably wouldn't even want to be here or talk about it. But I'm really proud about how everybody came together. It was my officers that went to his aid, that tried to do the best they could under trying circumstances, and got him to the hospital and got him the care that he needed. As days went on, the city started to come back together. We were there at the command post. We do the press conference, and I come out at like 9, well, probably about 10 p.m., or maybe even close to 11. So I've been away from home for 24 hours almost at this point. I just wanted to get home. And then I come out to the streets of Watertown and just lined with people with American flags running up and down the street. And then to get home and see it everywhere. in the city of Boston and in Harvard Square and Cambridge and in other parts of the country. We just doing our job, but I never realized how much support that we had as that whole time went on, that people in Boston really locked down. Saw the pictures afterwards, how no one was walking around downtown Boston. They stayed home and did exactly what we needed to do. And we've worked together. As time went on, the next morning, I couldn't sleep and I went back to work. The next morning, I was back to work about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in the dispatch area talking to my dispatchers in some of my offices. And at 7 a.m., they said, "Chief, the Boston Bruins are on the phone." And the Boston Bruins are a hockey team, and the Boston Red Sox supposed to play on Friday night, but because of the lockdown, they didn't play. And they said they have their game today at 12:30. And all the Bruins want to come out and they want to wear Watertown police hats. And she says, "Chief, isn't that great?" I said, "Yeah, Jessica, isn't that great? Except we don't have Watertown police hats." No one ever wanted a Watertown police hat. So we don't have them. She goes, "What am I going to tell them?" I said, "Well, tell them we'll get some, So we ran around and we had a local guy put Watertown police. We stole the Bruins logo without licensing and put it right in the middle of the hat. Put strong on the back and said, "Boy, that's great." And we walked, and the Bruins came out with them on, and then now everybody wanted one. And so we started making more hats, and then the Bruins finally said, "Hey, kind of knock it off, will you?" So we have a few of those hats, but now they're big collector's items. You'll probably see them on eBay. But as time went on, the Boston sports teams. And I had no understanding of this at the beginning, but they had a lot of our officers come to the games and be recognized. They had a lot of the victims come. And as we went through the stress units with our officers and everything like that, the doctors told me that the sports teams really get it. They get people out in front of crowds, and it helps the community start to heal. It helps the victims start to heal. It'll help your officers heal. They should go to as many of those events as you can let them go to. And it really was true, and it continues. The Red Sox are in the playoffs, and they had some of my officers on the field for the first playoff game. And they had the big Boston Strong logo out in center field. The whole crowd, welcomed the first responders. They had the doctors from the hospitals. They had some of the victims. So we're still healing as a city as we continue on. What Boston Strong means to me is a couple of examples. One of the surgeons from Mass General Hospital ran the road race, ran the marathon, and the bombs had gone off just after he crossed, and he realized there was going to be a lot of serious injuries. So there was no transportation because everything was getting locked down. So he ran to Mass General Hospital, which is another 6 miles, got to work, and ended up going into surgery and participated in 3 of the amputations of some of the victims. The Elliott Hotel is right by the finish line. The Elliott Hotel was emptied of tourists that were in there, and law enforcement took that over. The FBI bomb technicians, everybody came in and took over that hotel. And the law enforcement was quickly told that the hotel's closed, the employees are still coming to work. They don't have to really, but they're coming to work, but they're not being paid. So all the law enforcement guys would tipping everybody, throwing money, and that's hard for a cop to give up $1, never mind a few dollars. But they were giving them, anytime they saw anybody, were giving them some money just to help them out. What they didn't know was the employees were just going in the back and throwing it into a jar, and they took all that money and donated it to the One Fund. And that's where the city comes together and does those things. There's many, many more examples of how a city can come together and work together. As I said, I grew up in the Boston area. I've really always been proud of the city, but Boston means more to me now. I've run the Boston Marathon 3 times myself. It means a lot to me, that race. I'll run it again next year. I'm going to run it with a number of my officers. We want to make sure that's the best race ever in 2014. Janet's here with me, and I used to live in Boston. Now we moved out to the suburbs, and right after this happened, I said, we got to get back to the city. We went to Boylston Street when it opened after the crime scene was open. We went to pretty much every restaurant each night trying to support that, and the streets were just lined with people trying to support those businesses that had been closed for so long. And we just recently bought a condo in Boston, right about 2 blocks from the finish line, that we just want to be back into the city and be a part of the recovery in moving forward. So I can't say it enough that, yes, we lost, you know, a young boy, 3 other people died, but Boston is much stronger now than we were before April 15th. And I think as a country, we realize we need to come together when tragedies, and we're just one example of it. When tragedy strikes here, I'm sure everybody in this room is going to stand up and support law enforcement and do what needs to be done. I always had a great partnership with the people of Watertown. We ran a lot of programs. When the governor said, you know, Chief, will people listen to you when we want to shut down Watertown? And asked the commissioner of Boston the same question. I said, well, yes. I mean, just put me on TV. I can explain to them what I need them to do, and they will do it. And they did. And we needed to have that. Boston needed to have that. And so we worked through those partnerships. It's been a long struggle, but I think we're on the road to recovery. But I know if it happened here, the same thing would happen. And what I say to people, our community has really, really supported us. We've always had support. And I joke now, I say, well, now everybody waves to us with 5 fingers all the time now. But they are very good to us. But I will say that it shouldn't have to happen. What happened in Watertown, what happened to my police department, shouldn't have to happen in your community or any community in this country for you to support the men and women in law enforcement and the fire service and EMTs and all that. They work overnight. My officers were there. It was just supposed to be a regular shift, you know, 3 or 4 of them out in the street on a Friday, a Thursday into a Friday, thinking it was going to be quiet, and then they were called to do that. There's people on the street that'll work tonight, they work nights, they work holidays, they miss a lot of Little League baseball games, they miss the dance recitals, they miss families' birthdays to protect it. My officers work on 4 and 2 schedules, so there's never a long weekend to them. 4 days on, 2 days off, and it just rotates for them to protect and serve. So there's a big sacrifice they make, and they really can use the support of the community on a constant basis to give that reinforcement, because it is a tough job. So I'll end there and take some questions. I think they're going to have. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, if you would raise your hands, I'm sure there are some questions. Yes, sir, right back here.
2 quick questions. One, how much of an incidence and manifestation of post-traumatic stress disorder have y'all seen? And second, you mentioned the Red Sox. I remembered some of the comments made earlier the year, especially by David Ortiz. Is there a sense that they're playing for the victims in their run, since they're going to be in the League Championship Series starting later in the week?
They won last night, so yes, they are. Well, your first question is yes. I mean, and that's, you know, my biggest concern now as we move forward with my police department is what the doctors tell us is if there's an officer involved in a shooting, their life expectancy on the job is usually 2 to 5 years. And I have officers that were on the job that were in that shooting that were on 33 years. I had a kid that was out of the academy for 2 months. A couple of them 2 years, 7 years. So I got to make sure they're okay. We are slowly taking care of that. We've had stress teams come in at different phases, but not just for our officers, for our entire department, for the family members, because this played out on TV. I ran out of the house and Janet watched on TV for the next 20 hours, wondering if I was going to come home, and everybody in our department was the same way. So we brought in grief counselors, stress counselors for the children of our officers and their families, and we continue to do that. I just want to make sure that, you know, my guys are good, you know, 6 weeks out, 6 months out, in 6 years from now. So, but it's a work in progress. You know, they have good days and bad days. As far as the Red Sox, I think they are. I think they're a symbol of, you know, a city can rally around a sports team and say, you know, go and make us proud. In that day, you know, next day at the Red Sox game, when that happened, Ortiz was a spokesperson and he made some colorful remarks, don't screw with our city, but he said a little bit more than that. And so now people do want to see the Red Sox run the table, if you will, and have that duck boat parade through town. And I think, you know, it would be just a great thing for our city to happen. You know, we have to go through Detroit and Oakland and a few other cities that we don't want to see that happen. But I think for me personally, I think it would be great for our city to have that somehow happen.
Yes, question right here. If you'll wait for the microphone.
You mentioned the press, and I know that part of that was stressful for the families waiting at home and others, but would you say something about the role the press played, whether it was helpful or how that worked with your law enforcement efforts?
Sure. Great question. Well, in law enforcement, the media is not usually our friend, and but in this day, when we decided to do the lockdown, we had Watertown set up. We have two malls that are kind of across the street from each other. So we had our staging area in one mall where all law enforcement was, and across the street was where we staged the media. So when we needed to get our announcement out that we're going to close Watertown, we're going to close Greater Boston and do the lockdown and be able to give our messages, the media was the perfect way to do that. And they got our message out and they took it seriously. We asked them at times, this is very serious. We got tactical teams out. Please do not be given live shots out of tactical moves we're making in the field, and they honored that. And you know, we still have a lot to learn in law enforcement about how to use social media to get our message out. I know Boston was using social media for the 4 days trying to give, because there's a lot of misinformation. The media is always trying to get the message out first. But in those first few hours when we needed to get messages to our public, it was very good. I've heard many times now from the residents of Watertown, they said, Chief, seeing you, I was so scared. But when I saw you at the news conferences and you were calm, it made me calm. So we did use the media to our advantage, and they have a role to play, and they did a great job to help us that day.
Questions? Yes, sir, right here. He's coming with the mic.
How different will the security be this coming year? I can't imagine that they would have necessarily done any more than they did to prepare for the race as is, without just totally locking down a 26-mile route.
Right, and I don't think you can do that. I mean, it's 26 miles. You know, the Boston Marathon starts 26 miles out in a small community and just winds its way in. You know, there'll be more security measures, particularly around the finish line, but this could have happened anywhere. And actually, if it happened out in Wellesley, the halfway mark, we wouldn't have had those ambulances staged where we were. We would have lost a lot more people. If there's such a thing, we were lucky if it was going to happen where it happened in the staff that we had there. I don't know if we can change the way we go about doing business. I think Boston and the state will do some things different along the VIP area where that is, but we just can't lock it down. There's apartment buildings, there's hotels that just feed right out into the race. I know a couple other marathons have already banned backpacks, and maybe we'll take some of those steps. I think you'll see much more security presence. I think you'll see much more bomb dogs along the route to trying to do prevention, and us to get the word out. There's many cameras out, and anything we can do. But you know, we're a country where we're allowed to go out and go about our business. And if you look at it, I mean, every given Saturday there's football games across this country where there's thousands of people gathering that could be a target, and we just can't prevent everything. This to what degree I don't know, but it's not going to end in Boston. It's something else is going to happen, unfortunately, in this country. And the more prepared we are as a law enforcement and as you know, people in the communities to kind of rally together and be diligent. You know, there's steps that could have happened to prevent that. You know, people knew these kids, but no one spoke up. And if there's a message, it's like law enforcement needs help. We can't do it by ourselves.
Got a question right over here?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Zerman. I'm a first-year student at the Clinton School, and my brother is also a police officer, and so I really appreciate the difficult decisions you have to make day to day. And you were thrown in a really extreme situation and had to, you talked a bit about having to do a lockdown and a shelter in place. And I was wondering, in these situations, you don't have to talk specifically about this one, but in these situations where action's necessary right away, how do you take into account the Constitution, other legal questions in these extreme situations? Thanks.
Right. Well, I think there's a balance. So what we did is we didn't order everybody to stay at home. That was our recommendation. We had a major snowstorm about a month before where the governor made the decision that if anybody drove during that snow emergency, they could be subject to arrest or would get a traffic citation. We didn't even go that far. All we said was, this is a serious situation. Our strong recommendation is for shelter in place, lockdown. Some businesses did open. So it was fairly rare, but they did. But I think a lot of people came together and wanted to help. I've seen, I've heard some of the TV shows have debated that. Now, as police chief in Watertown, I haven't got one complaint from a resident of Watertown that said, I think it was unconstitutional what you did. I went to some meetings where people said, Chief, I never dreamed I would live in Watertown and see an armored vehicle come down my street. I said, and you liked it, didn't you? And they said, I sure did. So I think it was just unusual situation. We certainly understand that we can't do this day in and day out. It's just a rare thing that happened that seemed to be the right call, and people did it voluntarily.
Question at the back. Okay.
Hi, my name is Angela Bukenya. I'm a second-year student here too. I'm wondering, did the presence of new technology facilitate you in any actions you took? For example, would the telephone companies facilitate telephone numbers for their community so you could send messages of urgency, or how did you work with them?
Well, technology is always helping law enforcement, but we're always behind. I wouldn't. There's certainly some things that we use technology of during that whole time that I really can't speak about that really helped us. But at the same time, no one's cell phone worked. Because it was just, the towers just got overwhelmed. Most people all the time think it's law enforcement that shuts down the cell phones. No, we don't do that. It's quickly overwhelmed, and our cell phones didn't work. One of the lessons learned that I have to law enforcement is like, everybody lives by their cell phone, email and all that. Well, that didn't work for me that day. I couldn't use my phone, and my email just got banged out with just people all over the world sending me tips on how we could solve this crime. And it was like, oh my God, I had hundreds of emails. I couldn't even get through to figure out if anything was important there. Some things worked and sometimes some didn't. But technology, like I said, it plays a big part in any investigation, and as the trial plays out, I think you'll hear a lot more about that.
I have a question right here.
Hi. First off, thank you and your officers very much for your incredible service.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. My question is kind of on the day of the event. Obviously, like you said that your force got cut down to 65 from 75, and then of course, with an event like this, you have a higher presence that day than you normally would have on a shift. And when that happened, when an event of this magnitude, when everybody converged on that scene, for lessons learned after the fact, and analyzing things after the fact, did you notice that there were any holes left in other areas of the city that, since everybody converged on that, because of manpower, and also with the after action on that, would that have any effect on increased manpower in the future for you?
Well, good question. We did have everybody come to Watertown, a lot of law enforcement. What the other surrounding cities and towns tell me is they literally had no calls for service, that everybody was home. So there was nothing. Boston had, just ridiculous no calls, so they still had officers on the street. Cambridge did. But all around greater Boston, everybody was home watching it play out on TV and trying to do what they could to support us. So we really didn't have much. So that played in, the businesses that were around helped us. And one of the things that I failed to mention when I was talking is how can people help? Law enforcement can't do it by themselves. You know, I've been to many meetings with the Boston Commissioner, and he always says, anything that happens in Boston, we can't do it by ourselves. Everybody needs to work together. When our manhunt happened, about 2 a.m., we had so many officers out doing the search. And one of my officers knew somebody that was at the mall, at the Watertown Mall, there was a Target store. And he knew one of the employees. He called and he said, hey, you in the store? And he goes, yeah, what the heck is going on out there? And they had a quick conversation, and he goes, yeah, actually, there's usually about 8 of us, but there's 30 of us in the store tonight. We're doing inventory. He says, what do you need? He goes, we're out doing searches. We need mag lights, we need flashlights, we need batteries and everything like that. He says, okay, I'll just open the front door, put everything on a pallet that you need. And they shoved out everything that would light up and gave it to us. By 4 a.m., a lot of the officers were out. You know, obviously their loved ones are concerned about them. Their phones are dying. So we called Target and said, we need phone chargers. They took all the phone chargers off the shelves, shoved them out the door again, and gave them to us. By early morning hours, now we have people that need to eat and everything like that. And the New York, New Jersey Police Officer Benevolent Society had come down to the Boston Marathon just to kind of support it. And then they have a cookout, they have grills and everything like that to cook food for the officers that are working. And they stayed while the crime scene, the bomb techs were down on Boston Street. So they showed up at the Arsenal Mall with all their grills, but they had no food. So we called Target again and said, we need stuff. So they took all the hot doggers, hamburgers, rolls, and everything like that and rolled out the door. So when something like this happens, everybody can help some. I've gone around to a number of families in Watertown while all these tactical teams were out there that just opened their doors and said, if you need to use our restroom, our bathrooms, if you need, some place to sit down for a minute, you need something to eat or a drink of water, come on in. And they did that. Another restaurant over in Allston, Brighton, which is a part of Boston, their chefs had come in and they realized they weren't going to open. So the owner made the decision, hey, let's do something. So let's take all the food we have and just start making sandwiches. And they made hundreds of sandwiches, piled it into his car, and they drove over to Watertown. And he tells me, he goes, well, we came over there and we hit the first checkpoint and they checked us out. We went through, but we were missing 10 sandwiches. We get to the next checkpoint, another 10 sandwiches were made. But they finally made it to the command post. And it was a short a few more sandwiches, but they really helped us out.
We've got time for one more question. Right here, Anna.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Anna Applebaum. I'm a first-year student here at the Clinton School. And you mentioned that what happened in Boston could happen elsewhere. And I'm wondering if these small acts of homegrown terrorism or things along that line might be more of a new normal. How can police departments rethink their departments, or how can law enforcement sort of rethink and reimagine, reassess the way they prepare for such events? And have you seen smaller departments starting to do this, and what can be done in the future?
Well, it's a good question. It's a tough question. I think you're exactly right. We're starting to see more homegrown or people that have been in and out of this country that have different views that don't support our government, and all of a sudden they're not connected to the big Middle East groups over there. They're on their own. So it's much harder from law enforcement to get the intelligence on that. And it goes back to what I spoke about earlier. We need help from the community, that people can recognize that. There were signs there. And there are signs when whoever the next person is going to be, they're acting out some way, somehow, that's not normal. And we need to know about it in law enforcement earlier on, that's the help we need. But I don't think that's going to go away. I think you've hit on a right point.
Well, let's thank the chief for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. The one thing, if you skip a bit, I'd just say one more thing. Sure. Well, I said that, my police department, we always try to be the best police department in Massachusetts. And I say this for my men and women of the department now. I said, I don't really know if we are. We said we're going to get the feedback. But what I do know, for those 8.5 minutes down on Laurel Street in that back street of Watertown, we were the best friggin' police department in the world.
And Chief, I would say that the Boston Red Sox just picked up a lot of fans as a result of it. You all have a safe trip home. Congratulations to Nikolai DePippa for program number 800. Thank you all.